So this video opens with a bias disclaimer. My fundamental bias in making this video is episode 7.1, the first episode of season 7, was way better than I expected it to be. And episode 7.2 was vastly worse than I expected it to be. So, you can stop watching this video now. Maybe that never occurred to you. I thought everyone else would recognize that also. We watched this together, obviously. This is my girlfriend. I've been into Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire for like 4 years. She's been into it for like 4 months. At some point, we're going to have to update. So what is it, up 5 months now? I don't know. If you graduated 5 months, whatever. But, I've read the books. I know more of the deep background. And she obviously has gotten deeper and deeper into this because she fell in love with me, to her perpetual misfortune. But anyway, and by the way, we are broadcasting this right now from Thailand. We just got back from swimming in the ocean, and we've had distractions. We've had reasons not to make a video after each episode. Yeah. But if anything, I feel really doubly motivated to make some kind of response or discussion, because when we looked around at the other channels responding to this, we couldn't find a single person who in an intelligent way was criticizing episode 7.2, and so what was wrong with it? Right. Which to us, it was just like facepalm obvious that 7.2 was a terrible episode, horribly written and horribly executed, whereas 7.1 was way better than we expected. It was the best episode we've seen for several seasons.
I thought the first episode was great, but yeah, I agree, the second one was really cheesy. There was a lot of bad scenes, like just uncomfortable to watch, like why, like, and what is the purpose
uncomfortable
of
to watch, and not in a good way.
Not
like this is really philosophically challenging. Like
like the scene with Jon Snow and Peter Baelish was just like, what was the point of that? Like they could have made it something so much more interesting, but really it just was Peter Baelish saying like, oh, I've always loved your stepmom, and I've always loved Sansa.
One of the keys to the game here, I do have a little bit of a background in screenwriting or script writing, theater, or whatever you want to say. That scene, so it's an interesting one to start with. Peter Baelish talking to Jon Snow down in the dungeon, down in the crypts, right? Yeah. Why does it start when it does, and why does it end when it does? Why does Peter Baelish enter stage left when he does, and why does he exit when he does? That's, in terms of objective measurements of good writing, you normally need a good answer to this question. You don't just have people float on stage for no reason.
He didn't come down into the cave.
It's ridiculous.
He just is suddenly there.
Like, and Jon Snow even references how ridiculous. Jon Snow says, like, you don't belong here. What are you doing here? It's like, for us in the audience, it's like, yes, what are you doing here? This is a clear writer's contrivance.
For a minute.
Like, you don't just drift into a crypt, you know what I mean? Like he's not a vampire rising out of the grave. No, but that is a classical sign of bad writing. That is a like, in terms of the formal definition, some things you can't define. What is a great poem? What is not a great poem? You can't objectively define it. But that's a scene where, in terms of the whole tradition we have, ultimately going back to Aristotle, you'd say that's classically lousy writing. Yeah, for a minute I thought he was going to attempt to murder Jon Snow, but that didn't seem like the intent of the scene. Okay, but you see, that would have been better, because then at least he has a motivation for why he enters stage left when he does. Like, oh, here I am emerging from the shadows, because I was down here plotting to murder you. That at least gives him a motivation. I mean, the classic question you're taught to ask in theater is, what's my motivation? You ask that again and again. What's my motivation? Why am I entering now? Why am I interfering with the plot? Why am I doing what I'm doing? I would just say, on the global level of abstraction about the episode as a whole, I said to you after we watched 7.1 that episode 7.1 was so good that if somebody watched that and they'd never seen anything else before, that was their first introduction to Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, that I felt you could kind of be proud of that. Like, you show that to someone who was respectable. Episode 7.1 had a lot of old men talking about politics, which for me is the core of the show and the core of the books. It was like, wow, great. To me, there were a lot of solid, well-written scenes with people talking about politics that had a sense of consequence and weight and ethical, Yeah, particularly the Sansa scene with Jon Snow, where she was questioning his decision-making abilities. And but in 7.1, even Cersei talking to her brother, Jaime, those had a sense of weight and consequence, you know what I mean? It weren't flippant discussions about politics in this context of this war. I felt that someone who'd never seen any other episode or never read the books could watch 7.1 and go, oh, this is a show to be taken seriously. And then 7.2, I'm at the opposite extreme, but I found 7.2 so embarrassing. And imagine how awful it would be if you watched 7.2 with no prior knowledge of anything to do with the show or the plot or what have you, right? So if you kick it off with that, then what? You're looking at these long nude scenes that kind of start nowhere and go nowhere and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, and it's not that I'm against having any nude scenes.
Right.
Like I think I was talking to you about this. Like if the scene continued and the audience got answers to how they would actually have sex, how a eunuch would have sex with somebody, like we really don't get answers to this. Oh yeah, and as they mentioned in What the Flick, like everybody is curious, like what does his junk look like? They have done full frontal nudity on Game of Thrones. Like this would be an opportunity to do that where everybody is curious about this. But anyway, but it is just uncomfortable.
So that scene, again, I felt it kind of started poorly and ended poorly. Like it fades out at a ridiculous time, and it goes on too long given how little content it's get. I'm not opposed to nudity in principle, but the nudity needs to be telling a story. I think there were a lot of different questions that scene could have answered, not just what equipment does Grey Worm have to work with.
Yeah.
But like, one thing that could have been interesting, it could have been that we had the female lead say, like reflect on whether during sex or after sex or before, could be fully clothed. I don't care. You could advertise with the fact that she doesn't want to have children. Like, you know what I mean? It would just be a human thing. Like, oh, okay, so this relationship makes sense because she doesn't want to have kids. She wants to be with someone. Or, you could have her reflecting after sex. Like, you could just have her saying, it's okay, we can make this work.
Yeah, right.
Or she could have before or during or after, but it would be different. It would have more weight if it was after. It was like, yeah, you know what? Like, she can be satisfied with this. This can be okay for her. But whatever the consequences are, whatever the meaning is that the scene is trying to get across, it can't just be nudity for the sake of nudity or not at that length. I couldn't, I was sitting there just thinking, oh, well, this is awful, but at least it'll be over soon.
Yeah, I thought it could have ended when they first kissed.
Right, I know.
But then,
and then you're just kind of waiting for it to end.
Slow motion,
and nothing else.
Removal of clothes.
Nothing else got communicated by it. There was it didn't advance the plot in any way. It didn't answer any questions, and quite a few different interesting questions could have been answered about who is Missandei or what does she want out of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently not kids, or maybe she's never thought about it. I mean, so many different things. So again, if you're sitting in a writer's room meeting, maybe you could have them reflecting on the fact, because they talk about this thing of being feeling afraid because they're afraid the other person's going to die. Okay, here's something else that's interesting. In the past, I never had to plan for the future because I was a slave. Now I've got to think about having my own career, my own family, my own home.
Yeah.
That's also terrifying, right? There's so many different things where you could have Missandei saying to him, look, I'm not going to be the queen's plaything forever. I've got to move on and have my own household and have my own kids or something. That would be deep too. I mean, and again, I don't care if they're naked. If they talk about something meaningful while they're naked, then the nudity is no problem. There's a million different interesting directions you get.
Yeah.
And nothing. It's just crickets. I mean, it's just cue the violins. It's literally get their clothes off and cue the violins. And then it fades out. It fades out in a totally meaningless way. And again, so this is my point about the contrast between 7.1 and 7.2. If I was watching that with someone who wasn't already a fan, I would feel so embarrassed. Watching episode 7.2, I'm introducing the show. I'm trying to tell you that it's not just about dragons and boobs. You know what I mean? Oh no, this is something with real substance. 7.1 was really kind of dignified, and 7.2 was utterly lacking that sense of dignity. Right?
So, season 7, episode 2. Dragons and boobs.
But look, I don't think we want to go through it scene by scene and talk about everything that was so awful. For me, I think about 70% of the episode was awful. There was maybe 30% that had, that held together. I can't say every single scene in it was garbage. But
I don't think anyone in the discussions that we watched talked about Arya meeting with her friend. I forget his name.
Oh, Hot Pie. So he's nicknamed Hot Pie. Right. You're right.
And
huge missed opportunity. Terrible missed opportunity.
That's an opportunity for her to say, I've totally changed. I've been through a lot, and to discuss how she's feeling about what she's done. And and they also didn't address what happened with the Lannisters, the Ed Sheeran guys.
Yeah, that's true. So we're to assume they just all made good friends with the Lannisters, and everyone was fine together.
Pretty unusual.
But so Arya stepping into the scene there, Hot Pie asked her some questions that could have interesting answers, just including I think he just asked, "Whatever happened to you?"
Yeah,
it's probably that there could be a really interesting answer to that question. Arya has no answer. Like she's just hungry.
Yeah.
You're like, who the hell wrote this scene? But, I can imagine right off the top of my head 6 or 7 different really interesting answers for Arya to give. Like Arya could have said, I did whatever I needed to do to survive. Mm-hmm. Boom. And they could sit there and look at each other. Because this show, they seem to like long pauses and silence. They seem to like silent facial and eye contact based communication. But so if that's what you're going for, she could say, I got on a path of killing my family's enemies or something. She could have said anything, abstract or specific. She could have said, what, I've spent a couple months with a bunch of religious fanatics. That would have been like, imagine if that was if she reflected on the fact, what, I was a member of a religion I never believed in. Mm-hmm. That would have been really powerful too, for her to talk about the religious element of the fact she's basically been living like a priest as a member of a religion she never believed in. Like a million interesting things she could comment on or reflect on, or and we just get nothing. All we get is her grabbing food and pushing hot pie around.
Yeah, it was a really meaningless scene, and I feel like the only point that the writers had in including it was so that Arya found out that Jon Snow was at Winterfell.
Right.
So that just gave her a reason to leave. That was the only point in the scene. Like, other than that, they didn't discuss anything.
It advances the plot, and that's it.
Yeah, there's like an inside joke for people that have watched the show that, Arya had baked up two of the Freys into a pie. I didn't do that.
Have you been baking pies? 1 or 2? Right. Yeah.
But, but it was just awkward, the scene with, like, just in general, how intimacy is, I don't know.
Right?
The part with Theon, well, not Theon Greyjoy, Yara.
Oh my God, that was
Yara
terrible. No, I actually forgot about that. Yeah. So the attempted lesbian romance scene. Yeah. Terrible. Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because, female bisexuality is handled, in a pretty sophisticated way in the books. In the books, Cersei herself is bisexual or somewhat, and I think you could actually say Cersei's sexuality in the book is closer to gender identity crisis. So gender identity crisis is considered different from bisexuality. And she's really kind of dwells on the fact that she wishes she was born a boy. She feels her whole life would be better if she had only been a man instead of a woman. And, there's a lot. Cersei really reflects on her own sexuality a lot. And she does get drunk and sleep with one woman, maybe just once or twice, and so on. And it's kind of heavy, and it's also, in a sense, it shows the quality of the writing, because it manages to get you to sympathize with a woman who's committed so many atrocities, real atrocities. And in the book, you see it up close, where she's torturing people to death to get confessions out of them, get false confessions out of people, and so on. So anyway, I just say female bisexuality is in an intelligent and psychologically sophisticated way handled in the books. And then the TV show, you just have this kind of obscene, so. But if we're actually,
give me more wine, Theon.
Right.
While I go.
So if we're actually sketching out why that scene exists, now obviously it's interrupted dramatically. But if it doesn't, what's the point? Their relationship isn't political. It's not that one's seducing the other for political reasons. So the point is, these are two drunk middle-aged women on a boat who are bored and decide to, 1, get into bed together out of boredom primarily, and 2, to humiliate Theon. Yeah. That's all that's happening in that scene.
Right.
And it's awful.
Yeah, it's like, hasn't there been enough humiliation on Theon's part?
Yeah, right.
And, I just don't.
We kind of already had that when Theon was at the brothel with Yara, back in season 6. And that also didn't go anywhere. It didn't seem to do anything productive. But, what's the point? Like, your brother has been to some extent eviscerated. We don't really know. We assume he's a eunuch also. Yeah. And apparently,
I was kind of glad that scene got interrupted by the Greyjoy, Greyjoy army.
I wonder if the writer's point was to really give Theon a kind of an extra motive for why he would jump off the boat.
Oh, yeah.
Why he wouldn't feel positively towards Yara.
Pretty much treating me like shit, even though I've stuck up for her. I've said that she should be the queen, and I've been by her side.
Right.
She still continues to. Yeah, in that same scene at the brothel, and I guess it was
season 6. Yeah.
She was like, are you going to, are you going to kill yourself or what? Like,
are you going to be a man? Are you going to commit suicide or something? Right. Yeah.
So, she's been very harsh to him, like, even though, and she didn't actually save him from the, from Ramsay Bolton.
Oh, right. I didn't know that, right.
kind of left him there. I mean,
yes, no, which is terrible writing and totally bizarre and made no sense, right? Yeah. That was another, like, I can't even call it a plot hole or plot loophole. It was just absolutely terrible writing.
Yeah. So, and after all that Theon's been through, I kind of understand.
Wait, let's take another step back on a big scale. I mean, we could have said this at the start of. But look, for me, there's a big problem, which is more obvious in 7.2 than 7.1, that Daenerys simply doesn't represent an alternative to the status quo in any meaningful way. Now, in the East, she did, because she challenged slavery. So it's like, okay, so these are the, brutal overlords who are pro-slavery, and she's the brutal overlord who's going to abolish slavery. So there was a difference. Mm-hmm. But in Westeros, and again, it's this thing with having everyone wearing black. So for whatever reason, Daenerys wears all black, Cersei wears all black. So this is just another would-be conqueror, really offering you nothing
pretender.
But... Yeah, I mean, how is she better than or different from everyone else? And the hollowness of that, in this dialogue with Varys came out. For me, it comes out in the whole plot, even just structurally and aesthetically. It's like, well, what is Daenerys supposed to represent here? When Varys is saying she somehow represents hope for a better future or something better for the poor, why? Pardon me. What? So there was this joke from the Young Turks. They were saying that he's the Bernie Sanders of Westeros. Varys Sanders, right? Okay, but I don't remember Daenerys promising one thing that would help the poor. I don't remember her stating one word of concern about the poor or the peasants of Westeros. Not one. Before, she had this anti-slavery thing, which was a disaster. Mm-hmm. And in the books, it's a politically sophisticated, nuanced disaster. In the TV show, it's kind of never really explained, but we get the impression that her attempts to abolish slavery were a disaster, and then she just leaves town.
Yeah,
like that's
that's true.
That's what you get in the TV show. You don't get any real resolution or anything.
Yeah, maybe it's better in the books, but it is really strange to see all these people that are backing up Daenerys when I don't think that she's had. A good track record. She was with the Dothraki, who were, they enslaved.
Right. So the Dothraki are a culture based on conquest, looting, pillage, rape, slavery.
Yeah.
A slave economy above all else, right? So, and she's brought them to Westeros. And we have this, I think, probably the best scene in this episode was Jaime talking to Randall Tarley. And where Jaime makes the case to Randall Tarley, look, if you're supporting Daenerys, you're supporting hordes of barbarians who are going to rape and loot and enslave people, which is 100% true.
Yeah.
So in terms of the politics that are explicit in the show, everything about Daenerys and Daenerys' side is bad, is negative. Even though before she represented an abolition of slavery, now, what does she represent? What's her election promise? What makes her different from anyone else playing the Game of Thrones?
And she's got dragons.
Right, but from the audience's perspective, the answer has to be nothing. She doesn't have a moral leg up on anyone. Okay, I guess in this fictional universe, Cersei apparently openly acknowledges that she destroyed the Great Sept of Baelor, which is like destroying the Vatican, which is ridiculous. In the books, that'll never happen. I mean, the books, there'll be... it hasn't happened yet. We don't know. We're speculating because the next books we're talking about here aren't published yet. But it's unthinkable to me that George R.R. Martin would have something that gauche. In the books, I'm sure there will be some sophisticated excuse made that, terrorists blew it up or something. Somebody else will be blamed other than Cersei, at least by Cersei herself. But in this book, in the TV show, in contrast to the books, Cersei, I guess, has become so infamous. She walked naked in the streets. She burned down the equivalent of the Vatican. She killed the Pope. It's on such a level of villainy. Okay, maybe you can say people will look at Daenerys as a positive alternative to Cersei just on that level. But, I mean, don't forget, on the other hand, Daenerys is arriving with the most infamous man in the world as her hand. Which, watching it again, because we quite rapidly watched all 6 seasons before the start of season 7. We kind of we watched the whole thing again. And season 6 really, with the play within a play mechanic in season 6, gets across to you just how infamous,
Tyrion is.
Tyrion, he murdered his own father. Or he murdered a prostitute. He was a terrible hand of the king. For any of this, he apparently had something to do with the assassination of Joffrey from the outside perspective. Perhaps he's directly guilty of regicide against Joffrey. But this is the most infamous and hated man in Westeros and in the world who's there standing next to Daenerys. So do you really think morally you're so pure, you're such a contrast? It's surreal.
Yeah, and Daenerys moved to not kill so many people in King's Landing.
Right.
She's determining that they should starve the people.
Yes.
Which is not much better.
Right. Yeah.
And how is that going to win you affection from them?
Right. So we basically did a survey of all the major commentators on YouTube about Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
We saw one who did say, Preston Jacobs said, look, the acting by Emilia Clarke playing Daenerys is absolutely terrible, which we agree with, and it's not going to change. It's not going to be better, which we agree with. So that is true. And, I feel she was poorly cast even in season 1. I think she's been terrible throughout the whole show in terms of her performance, in terms of her interpretation lines. But then there's the question of just what the script gives her to work with, of what are the lines handed to her.
Yeah.
And for sure, as you say, I mean, it's absurd. It's like, oh no, we're not going to bomb the city. We're going to starve them until they... Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Okay. Like, what do you expect? Standing and, this was delivered with no irony. I mean, maybe another actress could have interpreted that in a little more right. Well, I don't believe in burning people to death. I have a more subtle, scheme in mind.
Yeah.
Starvation. Have you heard of it? I've heard it's devastatingly effective in time of war. It could have been in a little bit more of a self-aware provocative, but no, you have her standing there robotically with this blank expression saying, no, we not bomb them.
And everybody follows along.
Imagine
Yara's like, I'm with you. And...
instead of her crappy British accent, imagine how different it would be if she just had a Russian accent. The same character, so it would become farcical just by changing that. Yeah. But it is farcical. Her position is ridiculous. And look, I mean, obviously the whole thing is high fantasy. There are dragons involved. It's not like I'm asking for some greater degree of realism. I don't need to hear about how they're getting enough oats for the horses in their army or something. That's not my point. But
it is interesting at the end when she talks to Lady Tyrell.
Yeah.
And she says, I've known many clever men.
Yeah.
And basically tells her not to trust Tyrion.
Yes.
So she is the one. Not everybody follows along blindly with what Daenerys is planning.
But to me, that's interesting because I see Olenna Tyrell, the women from Dorne, and Tyrion as all similarly discrediting Daenerys. Because like Daenerys, if you represent some kind of moral high ground, whether it's abolishing slavery, or maybe abolishing feudalism, or maybe introducing democracy, because you could be anything like this, right?
Yeah.
Olenna Tyrell, the women from Dorne, they don't represent that at all. They just represent revenge, right? They're embittered losers from the War of the Five Kings who want mass murder, who want to massacre them. So how does that make you look good? The conversation between her and Varys would have been a great opportunity to talk about the very limited role that democracy has in the fictional world of Westeros. You did see that in the Iron Islands, which also they didn't mention in 7.1. Why is Euron the legitimate king of the Iron Islands? He was elected. He was elected. Now, it was shown poorly in the show. You just had a bunch of old men with beards shouting. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. But still, that is a system of election. Why did Jon Snow become commander of the Night's Watch? They had elections, And in the books, in Essos, they have very realistic, ancient world style elections. They do. So when I say realistic, I mean like he talks about the corruption. It's like, oh, it's election month here, so there are all these singers out in the bars singing about how great this or that candidate is. So he has this kind of realistically Renaissance context for what elections might be like, and talks about the bribery and different types of influence peddling and what have you. So yeah, I mean, he doesn't present democracy as a simple, pure alternative to feudalism, but it's there as an alternative. So imagine how totally different the dialogue between Varys, the fake-ass Robin Hood character. Varys, who all of a sudden is motivated by uplifting the poor. Yeah. Sorry, what? Sorry, when? When did you do that? Marjorie Tyrell was more of a hero with the poor than you are, Varys. The High Sparrow, the High Septon was more of a champion of the poor. Varys, when were you a champion of the poor? Never. This is completely phony. For the TV show, it's 100% phony and inconsistent. For the books, maybe it's only 98% phony. But I don't think the books will ever say anything like that. Claiming to represent the poor. Claiming to represent the realm is different from representing the poor and the downtrodden, right? Yeah. But what does Daenerys represent? Daenerys doesn't have anything to say to herself except her bloodline. Except she's born to do it. Therefore, she's going to kill whoever gets between her and the throne. That's all she's got to say for herself right now. And yeah, that would be way more sophisticated if she said something like, tell me, Lord Varys, you come from the East. You know that in Essos, not everything is determined just by birth or wealth. You know that in the free cities of the East, you have cities without slavery, where you elect your leaders, where leaders can change, where people can be changed without being decapitated. That's another big thing too, right? With an elected system, when you lose the election or you get replaced, you won last time but you lost this time, you don't get decapitated. Well, Westeros isn't like that. Feudalism isn't like that, right? The ability to change sides and change leaders without having massacres or executions, There could have been something really sophisticated in there. What we had, I think, 2 seasons ago was Daenerys declaring she was going to break the wheel. I think that was season 5 rather than season 6, right? What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean? That's not hope for the future. That's not abolishing slavery. Yeah. That's not Bernie Sanders. That's not free health care or cheaper college tuition. What does breaking the wheel mean? Yeah. All right. So, babe, you're less of a book reader. She has read some of the ridiculously enormous corpus of text. Was there anything? I'll put it this way: do you have any questions about where the series is going? Put it that way, because to me, 7.2 was a disaster. We agree about that. I just say and I feel embarrassed after 7.2. 7.2 made me feel embarrassed to be a fan of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I guess I don't really have general questions. I do wonder what will happen with Cersei.
Yeah.
I don't know if she. Well, I don't know. Now that Euron's on her side, Euron's army just overtook. And was it all of the armies? Was it?
Yeah. So we don't know how much he's destroyed, but he's
pretty much.
He's devastated her enemy's navy.
Yeah, and where were the dragons?
Yeah, well, maybe they don't fight in the fog. That was a battle in fog, right?
Maybe it was just too sudden that they didn't see.
Well, but it was in fog. Fog. I mean, maybe they'll mention it, maybe they won't. But fog could be a factor that the dragons didn't even know this was happening.
Yeah.
Nobody knew from afar. Fog, historically in warfare, fog has often been of crucial importance that way for naval battles, especially.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth is right now Cersei is the only character with a coherent plot line that's still kind of going on and a coherent motivation. I thought something that's interesting is Cersei could get married. That's been discussed. Cersei can marry Euron, or Cersei can marry someone. Jaime also could get married. Yeah. So, instead of torturing to death the women from Dorne, they could say, well, your punishment is you're going to get married to Jaime and have kids with Jaime. I think they won't do that because that would actually solve some of their problems. You could create an alliance between King's Landing and Dorne. But both of them could be married to cement their position. But I don't know. I mean, the other thing is, whether it's, Lord Varys or anyone else, the lack of interest that the show demonstrates in the small folk, we have no feeling of how ordinary people in King's Landing or anywhere perceive these bizarre, over-the-top characters. Because in this universe, everybody knows that Jaime and Cersei are an incestuous couple. It's just an overt, established fact, right? You can't say it in front of the queen because you'll get executed, but everyone knows it. Everyone knows she burnt down the Great Sept and everything. So, the level of infamy and these, ridiculous of the things. We got a sense of that just with Tyrion through the play within a play mechanic. So we have a sense of how Tyrion is perceived by the public. But we have no sense of how Cersei, Jaime, or even Daenerys. We have no sense of how any of the other players are really perceived by the public. And I think that would really enrich the whole thing as a work of art, as a TV show, if we had that sense for all of them,
Yeah, it's not really a question, but more of a prediction. The whole point of Jon Snow getting the dragon glass is to fight the White Walkers.
Yeah.
So I see it going one or two ways. So I don't know if Cersei has even acknowledged this war in the North yet. But Daenerys is now learning about it, and she obviously next episode, Jon Snow will talk to her about this.
We got just one scene where Cersei completely dismissed the situation in the North.
Yeah. She
dismissed it as superstition and nonsense.
Yeah.
And so, basically she represents someone who is not taking that seriously.
Well, just out of entertainment value, I think it would be interesting to have Daenerys win the Seven Kingdoms and then all of them fight the White Walkers, the undead.
I guess, but I mean
that would be the end of that would be a good end to the whole.
So I just say this, back when I was studying the theater, I remember 2 of the students started beating each other with these wooden bats. So they're stage bats, so they don't actually hurt you. And the teacher said, I don't know why the teacher did this. And, the students kind of laughed, but they didn't, it was just kind of funny to see these 2 students do it. And the teacher said, no. And she handed me the bat, me and the guy next to me. And she said, show them how it's done. So I don't know. This is done unprepared and rehearsed. Yeah. And whereas the other 2 guys were really rapidly just beating each other for no reason. me and this other guy next to me, he hit me once, slowly, clowning, and then I really reacted and touched it. We did facial expressions, everything, really, acting it out. And she said, "Do you see the difference?" He said, beating each other with bats in a vacuum is meaningless. It's not funny. It's not exciting. It's not action. You have to have the motivation and the emotional reaction, and you have to, you know what I mean? You have to. It's not the bat striking the person. It's seeing the person recoil, seeing them in their eyes, thinking, now I'm going to get back at you, and pulling the prank at the person. It's the acting is about kind of everything outside and surrounding the impact. And likewise, I mean, you're talking about these wars. The war in a vacuum is just meaningless. Watching stuff get lit on fire.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Episode 7.2 was so dire that the battle scene was like a nice relief. Like, it was the best part of the episode was watching these boats, crash into each other.
Yeah,
that was the only part that was well represented. But still, I mean, war in a vacuum. It's the same with reading the newspaper, though. If you're reading about a war where you know nothing about, none of the sides, then it's just a body count. It's meaningless to you. So it's, again, Daenerys fighting a war to abolish slavery. That's meaningful, right? It's partly the objective and her struggling with that and, missing the mark. That's what makes it meaningful. But what is it now? Daenerys fighting a war?
So that she can be queen, yeah. Just to be the rightful
because her bloodline is better than the other person's blood. And we all know the author doesn't believe in that. The moral of the story is not going to be people with good breeding should rule over those who do not have. That is not conceivable. That's what the moral of the story, right?
It just seems like Daenerys is more fantastical. Like, where she's come from is this foreign land, and she has dragons, so it just seems more likely that she would be the one to take down the White Walkers.
Sure.
As opposed to Cersei. It just doesn't seem like something Cersei would be involved in. I don't know. I could be wrong, but we'll see.
So there are fewer than 8 more episodes this season? I forget if they have 10. No, only 7 episodes this season, I think. Yeah, it's a really short season.
5 more episodes.
I can ask you, do you think they're going to wrap it all up this season? Do you think this is the last season? Or do you think there's another one after that? I legit don't know the answer. Maybe nobody knows.
It is going faster than I expected because the premiere for the next episode showed Jon Snow. I mean, the next episode he's going to be in,
so maybe that's
Dragonstone.
It. Maybe that's the ending. Daenerys goes to the north, teams up. Jon and Daenerys team up, go to the north, beat the White, and then it's a wrap. That's it. So it's possible this is it. It's possible this is the last season. We have so many thousands of pages more in the books that there's got to be more to it. But maybe they just said, hey, you know what? We cast this with child actors, and now the child actors are all middle-aged. It's time to wrap it up.
Yeah,
7 years is a long time.
Too tempting to have that option, to have dragons breathing fire on zombie giant.
Right. And then try to sell t-shirts with that image and then call it a wrap. I guess that's all we're going to see at HBO. The damn shame is that legally there will never be a movie series made. There will never be an animated movie series. HBO owns the only rights. So this is all that's ever possible. When we're old people, 20 or 30 years from now, they'll take another hack at it. But I think this artistic and intellectual failure is all that we're going to see in our lifetimes. I just wish that wasn't the case. I wish contractually it were possible for us to look at this and say, well, there can still be a movie adaptation. And I've always felt, just in terms of budget and also what you can put on screen, I think it'd be great to have an animated film or to have a film that just is willing to blend the two. Yeah. Because there's a lot of supernatural stuff that's easier to do in the books. That's easier to do with anime than with actors. Just to give you an example, there's a scene that nobody's read yet, but that George has talked about, where Tyrion sinks down to the bottom of a river and has a conversation with some kind of god. So I don't know what that god really is another question, because I think this is being written by an atheist. It's probably not a god at all. But a scene like that I can totally imagine being done in an animated format, or even just trying to get across the sense that there's something meaningful about the mind to wolf relationship that the Stark family has, which in the TV show they completely fumbled. Very easy to do, I think, with animation, or I don't know, some kind of more creative and surreal filmmaking. Very difficult to do with actors, in this kind of Star Trek style that they've adopted on HBO.
Yeah, and just from the little bits that I've read from the book, I think it would be easier to animate rather than do hair and makeup.
Yes.
Just certain characters that They sound unrealistic. Like
oh, right,
just
yeah.
how the descriptions of the characters, and also the White Walkers. They sound like it seems like impossible to actually. That's probably why they did what they did in the show,
right?
Because you can't have like made out of glass characters.
Yeah, they're kind of like ice elves.
Yeah,
they're kind of yeah.
And the Children of the North or Children.
Yeah, the Children of the Forest. Children of the Forest.
Yeah,
right.
Probably would just look better animated.
Right.
But.
Well, and they're intentionally described very vaguely. The Children of the Forest. A lot of people think they're supposed to be lizard-like.
Oh, okay.
But we don't know. It's like it's picking a few adjectives here and there. It's really like we really don't know what they look like. Yeah. And on the show too, I guess they kind of went a little bit lizardy, a little bit. Funny
yeah, it is a
looking,
little.
Yeah. But anyway, it's funny. I mean, in some ways, it's hard for me to imagine it as an anime, as an animated series of films. I guess it's hard for me to imagine it just keeping your attention when there are long scenes that are just people's faces talking to each other in anime. I mean, I guess that's the weakness, because that's not,
Sure, that's true.
That's really kind of the disadvantage of that. But in other respects, it would be such a huge advantage. And like I said, if I was ever handed this creative task, my first challenge would be just getting rid of the horses. Because the amount of budget and time and everything else. And we saw this, this analysis of the Battle of the Bastards. Sorry, you didn't watch that with me. But anyway, there was this video analyzing what went wrong with that. Yeah, it's millions of dollars and a huge hassle to get horses to charge at each other and not die. You can't actually impale a horse on a spike, on TV anymore. It's not legal and so on. So, yeah, I mean, I could imagine Game of Thrones also being great with no horses. Just set in a fictional world where there are no horses. There are a lot of changes to be made. But absolutely none of that is ever going to happen. I think this is it. I mean, I think they're rushing through the books here. I think this is the last season. And they're just going to have, the robot Daenerys Targaryen go up north, solve everyone's problems with Dragonfire. And that's the happy ending. And then that is it. And then I guess we'll have a few years where the other books come out from George, where we get the other 7 Dunk and Egg stories, and we assume 2 more novels in the book set. But the rights to the fictional universe of Westeros are exclusively owned by HBO, so really not much else is possible.
Right.
So yeah, for me that's really a great shame. Sorry, no point getting into this, but I think ideally what would have been done, or what could still be done, would be to have a series of films backed up by like Netflix features. So, you have side stories. You have some of the lesser characters or smaller side journeys as made for TV or made for internet short films, and then have big films taking on some of the big topics. Because in the books, I mean, again, the books are not perfect, but like at one point, Tyrion goes on this long mission down a river. He has this long journey. And it's not that easy to adapt for cinema, And at one point, Brienne goes on a long journey. So, I mean, I can imagine trying to do a hybrid. But yeah, look, I mean, obviously, everyone involved in this project, including Emilia Clarke, nobody can tell them they're doing a good job, because from their perspective, it's a multi-million-dollar success. Nothing blinds you to your failures like success, especially when that success is numbered to the millions of dollars and millions of viewers. So I can't blame them for that. Yeah. And I just say I'm not like this. Sorry, I'll get the guy's channel name wrong. I'm not like some other critics who really feel like this is a total failure and that Dan and Dave, the showrunners and producers, didn't have a right to make the creative decisions they made. I think that it is natural to make decisions to try to work on the strengths of the actors and try to rewrite the script around the cast you've got to make the most of the talent you've got, the advantages and disadvantages you've got. I think all that's natural and normal. But I do nevertheless kind of think this is a failure. From my perspective, it doesn't matter how many millions of dollars you make in too many important ways to failure. And that's how I feel after watching 7.2. And I would have felt completely different about this if we had recorded this video right after 7.1. I would have been so much more optimistic. But we were busy. We just flew to Thailand and all this stuff. But yeah, so that's also a funny irony. Is that instead of, because after 7.1, I would have come around here and said, wow, we're finally back to great writing and a show that's fundamentally discussions about politics and where it's really about the plot and the substance. Wow, this is a show we can be proud of again. And after 7.2, my optimism is gone. And I'm talking about this as a failure. Yeah. All right. In just a few more months, it'll be all be over. And then I'm guessing it'll be a few years from now that we'll get the new book. Yeah. And then that'll be an interesting, bittersweet thing. You'll get to look around the internet and say, hey, who's still passionate about this now that this isn't on HBO anymore? Who's still really into this, work of literature? And then probably, like, over the next 10 years, probably there'll be a really cool scene in terms of conventions and things as the TV show gets forgotten and the enduring value of the books, really continues. People will keep podcasting about it, but at a very different pace and very different mood when it's no longer a multi-million selling TV show, when it's just this book series where it's people, oh, yeah, oh, those books are still coming out? Oh, really? You know what I mean? That's... I'm sure for people who are fans, I'm not a fan of Tolkien, but it must have been like for Tolkien fans after, the movies happened for Lord of the Rings. And then there must have been this transition to a very different kind of quiet period where, it no longer was a mass media spectacle. Yeah. So I think that's what we're going to next 10 years. Well, let's just hope the next episode redeems itself. I have no hope. I'm just being serious with you. I have no hope. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging in with us.